Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gareth Lloyd. I'm General Manager Corporate Affairs for the Global Institute. I'm delighted to have you on our webinar today. In welcoming you to the webinar, I'll just make a couple of points. It's one of a series of webinars on key topics that the Institute does, on key topics across the CCS chain. Obviously, you'll be aware, because you're on the call, that we published this flagship report on the 10th of October, and you may well have seen it on our website. It is very much our flagship publication. It gives a global picture on developments in CCS across the whole chain, including updates, data, and also, of course, a lot of insights. I'm going to introduce our speaker today, and she is Edlyn Gurney. Edlyn manages the development of the global status of CCS reports and has done for several years. She leads the analysis of CCS projects around the world and has actually worked for the Institute since 2009. Just before we do that, a couple of housekeeping points. The first one is that we will ask Edlyn to make her presentation, which will run for about 20 minutes or so. And I encourage you to ask questions as we go, so please just put the questions into the box you should see on the right hand side. What we will be doing here is taking your questions, and I, as your MC, will be posing this to our panel, including Edlyn, once we get to the end of the presentation. So Edlyn will run to the end of the presentation and we will then do the questions. What that means is that you're very much encouraged to ask questions. In some cases, I may take the liberty of combining two questions, or maybe even three if they're almost on the same topic, just for efficiency of time. What I will be doing once Edlyn's done her presentation is introducing you to our panelists, who are all specialists from the Institute, so that way we will be able to cover the different topics, which are obviously all wrapped up in the Global Status of CCS 2013 report. So without further ado, what I'm going to do now, and there'll be a sort of brief interval, is I will hand over to Edlyn to take charge of the presentation. Edlyn.
Thank you, Gareth. The most recent International Panel on Climate Change report is an urgent call to action. Commentators around the world are backing up this call. The co-chairman of the IPCC outlines this need strongly when he reiterates that climate change is the greatest challenge of our time. Early next year, the IPCC will issue its report on mitigation action. However, it's clear that mitigation action will need to take place on many levels, using the most cost-effective options available. However, the difficult reality is that fossil fuel use is increasing, and the IPCC makes the science clear that climate change is being caused by human activities. Way that energy is generated and used. To keep us to the International Energy Agency's 2-degree scenario by 2050, we need to use all the technologies that you can see on the bottom half of your screen. And to deal with climate change in this least cost scenario, CCS will need to account for 14% of all CO2 reductions needed by 2050. CCS is a vital part of this low-carbon future. Without CCS, current climate change mitigation goals are probably not achievable. But we need action now to make sure that CCS will be able to take its full part. The Global Status of CCS is our Institute's flagship publication. Through this annual series of reports, we monitor CCS projects and CCS development more generally. And based on this research and analysis, we've produced a series of recommendations that I will go through in this presentation. The slide that you can see in front of you now shows the current set of large-scale integrated projects, and they're being broken down by their stage in the project lifecycle, as well as their geographic breakdown. In our 2013 project survey, we have found that there are now 12 operating CCS projects around the world. This is an important boost from the 8 that we reported in 2012. We now have the capacity to prevent 25 million tonnes of CO2 from entering the atmosphere each year. CCS really is a reality. For a geographic breakdown of these 3 new projects, there are 3 in the US, which now brings the total to 7 operational projects there, and the other new project is an important addition, which is the first operational project in Brazil, the Petrobras Lula oil field project. It is interesting to note that all 4 of these newly operational projects all use enhanced oil recovery, EOR, as their storage, and all are in industries where CO2 separation is undertaken as a matter of routine, including gas processing, hydrogen production, and fertilizer production. This next slide shows the anticipated amount that all the LSIPs, if they were to reach operation, would be able to store by their storage type. This chart clearly demonstrates how EOR continues to drive much project development. This is most evident in the US and Canada, where CO2's commodity value is the highest. However, we believe that current market opportunities, such as EOR, can only provide added support for a limited number of projects and may not be relevant in all regions, potentially such as Europe and Australia. And while EOR has dominated the mix, there are more projects that are going to come online soon that are using deep saline formation as their storage solutions. By 2015, when the 3 projects that are currently under construction, which is Gorgon in Australia, Quest in Canada, and Illinois Industrial CCS in the US, when these projects commence operation, we'll actually be able to increase our storage mass for non-EOR projects from the current 1.5 million tonnes per annum to over 7 million tonnes per annum. However, storing CO2 in large-scale deep saline formations is not new. The Sleipner project in Norway, which commenced in 1996, and with the later commencement of Sjøvits, also in Norway, and in Salar in Algeria, these projects together have effectively stored over 20 million tonnes of CO2. This next slide shows the breakdown of projects over the last 4 years. It's been slower than expected, but you can see at the execute stage, which are the projects under construction, we've continued to see progress in this area. The 2 to reach this stage in 2013 are the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line with Northwest Sturgeon Refinery and Utamanya CO2 project in Saudi Arabia. Although you cannot see an actual net difference from 2012 to 2013, as this was offset by projects commencing operation. It has been positive to see these developments over the years in terms of projects reaching operation as well as commencing construction, but what we have seen that is quite concerning in 2013 is a sharp decrease in total numbers of projects, from the 75 we reported in 2012 to the now 65 in 2013. And unless the political and economic environment changes, it's difficult to expect a ramp up in project numbers in the near future. The difficulties arise, however, for CCS in that it can have long lead times, and projects need to commence planning now if they envision being operational in the early 2020s. This is especially the case for power generation projects and where the primary option for storage being pursued are greenfield deep saline storage sites. So if CCS is to make its full contribution to climate change mitigation, we need to have more projects in the pipeline now. So we are concerned that CCS progress is currently below the pace required to make its significant contribution to climate change mitigation. In our project survey, 70% of respondents agreed that policy uncertainty was a major risk to their projects. We do not want to risk the projects that are currently in the pipeline. In fact, we would like to see new projects. Insufficient policy support is also a key barrier to entry. And without policy incentives to attract private funding, it's difficult to create the economic and market conditions needed for CCS demonstration and deployment. Fundamentally, to create an environment that is conducive to CCS development, long-term commitments to climate change mitigation goals are required in a manner that is technology neutral. In terms of funding programs that are available to the current suite of projects, much of this funding has been exhausted. In addition, many of the funding programs have not delivered in line with former commitments. The orange section that you can see on the chart there is the unallocated funds, and these funds are not always guaranteed for CCS. Further financial support is needed to help existing projects and to encourage new projects, especially in Europe. After all, these first mover projects incur higher risk and costs, but they're vital for demonstration at scale. A combination of support mechanisms may be needed in different countries, and the UK, for instance, is a good example of a multi-level policy approach to support CCS demonstration. To assist first mover projects, a boost of support is needed now. This short-term support is to help overcome barriers, including bias in funding and other support policies, and also to help drive down technology costs in the future. As we start to see more robust and strong CCS projects move forward and commence construction, this will further help build confidence in the CCS technology. It will also assist in firming the value of CCS. Principally, we do not want CCS to be disadvantaged in relation to other low-carbon technologies. Now, this chart shows the breakdown of the projects that have been cancelled or removed since 2000, the decrease from 75 to 65 large-scale integrated projects. This actually reflects 13 projects that have been cancelled, put on hold or restructured, which was offset by 3 newly identified projects. The projects that have been removed have been so for a variety of reasons, and this includes difficulty with securing financing, lack of legislation, missing out on funding programs, the changing economic environment such as natural gas prices, and investment reprioritisation by project proponents. It is interesting to note, however, that you can see that the majority of projects that have been cancelled are in power generation, and it is in power generation that often the highest additional costs of incorporating capture are seen. This situation reiterates the case that assistance is needed to facilitate these power generation projects that can help in turn reduce the costs in the future. Concurrently, we need projects to be smart and innovative about how they go about developing their business case, and where possible to include diversification of products and revenue and try and pursue strategic alliances. We can see from the chart above that all the currently operational projects are in industries other than power. However, you can see that at the execute stage, which is projects under construction, there are 2 projects in power. And in 2014, an important milestone will be reached when these 2 projects are scheduled to commence operation. These projects are Boundary Dam using post-combustion capture in Canada and Kemper County using pre-combustion capture in the US. It is important, however, that these projects are not alone, and without adequate support, many of the 28 projects currently in the planning stages remain at risk. Although some of these projects are more advanced than others, and the Institute anticipates that a further 4 projects could be in a position to make a final investment decision, that is 4 power projects, in the next 12 months. This includes 2 in Europe and 2 in the US. This would be a much welcome development. This next chart shows the capture capacity of the LSIPs and in their anticipated year of development, and you can also see the previous levels from the last 3 years. It is encouraging to see that generally the mass of CO2 potentially captured and stored is likely to increase for the remainder of this decade. The IEA emphasises that these next 7 years are critical to the acceleration of CCS, and we need CCS to be accelerated if we to be able to achieve low carbon stabilisation goals. However, the IEA states that currently the progress is significantly below the trajectory required to meet longer-term goals in 2030 and 2050, and the IEA's revised targets for CCS by 2020 imply that all projects that are currently in the advanced stage of planning are realised, and several additional projects are rapidly advanced. We join with the IEA in saying that governments and industries must ensure that the incentive and regulatory frameworks are in place to deliver this outcome. To assist the projects in planning and also to help new projects, we need to create favourable conditions that will help these projects and help remove any possible barriers. Over the recent years, we've seen important legal and regulatory developments. However, there are outstanding issues that still need to be addressed in many jurisdictions, including the determination of liability and arrangements that need to be made when a project ceases operation, and for the cross-border movement of CO2. By enacting policy through regulations, we can help lay the groundwork for the eventual development of CCS. This is also the kind of work that can be done in developing countries and that can help minimize potential delays in the future. After all, the IEA estimates that to meet emissions by 2050 will need to occur in non-OECD countries. And with developing countries consuming energy at increasing rates and building large amounts of generating capacity, emissions could dramatically increase without CCS. Yet overall, in many developing countries, CCS remains at the very early stages of development. Encouragement is needed to help developing countries consider whether they should pursue CCS, and if they believe they should, then there's help needed and help available for them to implement any changes that need to be done. Although significant progress is being made in some countries, including in the advancement of storage programs and with considering regulations. This next chart shows the regional breakdown of projects over the last 4 years, and you can see in China there has been continued progress in terms of the number of CCS projects, with 5 in 2010 and now 12 in 2013. While all 12 of these projects are in the planning stages, 4 have actually moved forward in the last 4 years within these planning stages to being more advanced. There is also a strong pilot and demonstration program in China that underpins many of these large-scale projects and gives us confidence for their further development. China is still well positioned to influence the future of CCS. However, we are concerned that outside of China, we're not seeing the replenishment of projects in the earlier stages of development. For the demonstration and eventual deployment of CCS, a robust program of research and development is needed. These smaller scale projects are crucial for reducing costs and strengthening investor and stakeholder confidence. In Power, we have many of these large test facilities across post-combustion, pre-combustion and oxy-fuel combustion. And while continuing these efforts in Power, we need to concentrate on key industrial gap areas like iron and steel and cement, where much more work needs to happen. And these are industries where there aren't many more options for CO2 reduction than CCS. And through these more globally coordinated efforts and collaboration, we can achieve more cost-effective R&D. These smaller scale projects also have an important role in storage. Around the world, more than 40 small-scale injection programs have contributed enormously to advancing our understanding of the behavior of CO2 in the subsurface. The research of these projects covers many aspects that will help larger-scale projects and includes work on characterization, modeling, risk assessment and monitoring methods in the different storage solutions, including saline formations, depleted hydrocarbon fields, coal beds and oil fields. Some of these projects are also being used as part of proving up storage that could facilitate larger scale projects. This is the approach being taken through the US Department of Energy's Regional Sequestration Partnership Program. It's also positive to see that research is being taken out on the large-scale integrated projects as well, such as Bell Creek in the US that is using CO2 from the industrial facility Lost Cabin for enhanced oil recovery. And while it is a fully commercial EOR operation, characterization, modeling and monitoring are directed towards examining longer-term storage. There is a need for a continued focus on maturing demonstration project sites, which is what the US regional partnerships are pursuing. For while storage screening is very important, even after the initial assessment, storage site selection can take 5 to 10 years or more. But there are currently limited incentives for industry to undertake. Through proving up storage sites now, we can decrease the risk of demonstration and deployment programs being slowed down in the future. The scale of infrastructure required for CCS to help meet climate change mitigation targets is enormous. The transport infrastructure that needs to be built in the next 30 to 40 years would be 100 times greater than currently in operation. Trunk lines that connect capture projects with storage formations could help lower the entry barriers and allow for the optimal development of infrastructure. An example of such a pipeline is the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line in Canada. The initial supply of CO2, which is nearly 2 million tonnes of CO2 per year, will come from the Argram CO2 stream and the Northwest Sturgeon refinery stream. But at full capacity, the trunk line will be able to transport up to 14.6 million tonnes of CO2 from various industrial sources. This investment in the future is really motivating to see. To finish, we have seen that positive progress has been made in 2013 with 12 projects in operation. However, it is imperative that we address the decline in the number of projects in the pipeline. In the short term, an injection of support is required to help demonstration projects proceed and to build confidence in CCS. It is vital that we do this work so that CCS can play its part in climate change mitigation and in providing energy security. However, above all, action on long-term climate change mitigation commitments is the key to underpinning the deployment of CCS. The time to act is really now. Gareth, I'll hand back over to you for questions.
Thank you, Edlyn. Now we've got plenty of time for questions, and just a quick reminder, we'll take as many questions as we can, and what we'll ask you to do is to fill them in that panel, and we will field them, or I will field them to our panel, which I will introduce to you now. That panel consists of Edlyn, who's been the main speaker, Holger Beitz, who heads our projects section of the Institute, Gwen, who is our specialist on project financing and funding. She authored the business case chapter of the status report. Ian Havercroft, who's our specialist in legal and regulatory affairs. And as I said, Edlyn as the main speaker. So I'll allocate some of the questions and others I'll ask our panel to actually take a specific question because it's in their area. So there's a question here for Holger, if I may. So if most of the cancelled CCS projects are in the power sector, why hasn't the focus shifted into the industries such as cement, iron and steel, petrochemicals and so on? Holger?
I think what we actually see here is a movement from the lower cost industries to the higher cost capture industries. It is natural for developing technologies that they start really with applications that have been tested and have a history and a track record, and as Edlyn mentioned, really capture CO2 as a matter of routine, and then move up the cost ladder to the more costly and unproven and not demonstrated technologies, and power generation definitely belongs to that group, followed then by iron and steel, cement, as the even more costly applications for CCS. Nevertheless, these sections and sectors have to be decarbonized as well, and as Edlyn also mentioned, CCS is basically the only technology that can help in that industries.
And a question I'd pose for Ian, which is an add-on to what we've just asked, is the level of policy and legal uncertainty the same for the power sector and other industries such as cement, iron, steel and petrochemicals? Can you comment on that?
Thanks, Gareth. I'm not sure I can on the policy side. On the legal side, I think the level of uncertainty probably is very much the same, and many for the reasons that Holger mentioned. I'm sorry, that's a very brief answer, but I think that's probably the most simplistic.
No, that's fair enough. Well, a general one for our panelists then. A follow-up, I guess not an easy, but if most cancelled CCS projects I beg your pardon. What impact do you think the new US EPA coal regulations and performance standards will have on CCS? That's another one for Ian.
Okay, now I could probably speak for forever on this, Gareth, but in the interests of brevity, I mean, I think it's important to point out that the EPA coal performance standards that we've just seen are still very much in the draft stage, and if earlier consultation period is anything to go by, and the 2.5 million comments that we received on those ones, then I anticipate that this is going to be very much a hotly debated issue in the US. What I perhaps could refer the listeners or participants in this webinar to is a recent blog or insight that was posted on the Institute's website by the General Manager for our North America office, Victor Durr. And in this insight, Victor Durr has set out a very detailed analysis of the US EPA's proposal and really some of the critical issues around the application, the nature of the proposed standards, and some of the regulatory schedule and what's anticipated for these new and existing sources going forward. So I'd really suggest that that our listeners or audio members read the blog on the Institute's website.
Okay, that's very helpful, and certainly I'd point to a lot of material in the Insight blogs that we've got on the website, which if you've got certain specialist interests, you should find really useful. I've got another question here for Holger. If we will be able to tell which of the 3 CCS technologies can be best for the power generation sector, and if yes, when might that be?
Well, the 3 key technologies, again, Helen mentioned that are pre-combustion, post-combustion, and oxy-fuel, and all are applicable for power generation. Clearly, the pre-combustion technology is the most complicated one. You're basically building a chemical plant that then has the combustion process. The second one, the post-combustion technology, definitely has the advantage to be added to existing facilities. So that's something that is of high value, in particular to economies and power generation systems and networks that don't have the demand for new facilities to be built and have to cope with existing plants, sometimes even quite old-aged. And the oxy-fuel technology is something in between that really helps to make the actual combustion much cleaner and producing a pure stream of CO2 by using oxygen in the actual combustion process. All of the 3 technologies have their specific pros and cons, and it's definitely up to the project proponents to decide which technology suits their project, their environment, their proposition best.
Thanks, no, that's very helpful. And another one for Holger. What types? We talked quite a lot about incentives to move projects forward. What types of incentives do you think will be useful to ensure projects under development continue to move forward?
Yeah, maybe just as an opener, before I hand over to Gwen for some further comments, she has written the chapter on the business case. And clearly, you know, projects are currently being undertaken for a couple of reasons, and Gwen may comment on that. And the reasons may just be to demonstrate the technology or to remain at the front end of engineering capabilities, to be the market maker. And it's clear when you add a costly technology like CCS to your process that you have to balance the costs that come along with it. And it's not clear in many jurisdictions and countries around the world that you can gain higher revenues with plants that don't emit CO2. So you have to have incentives, and those incentives can be varied. And maybe at that point I can pass over to Gwen and let her comment on the possible incentives and structures or even private business case means that are available to cover the so-called cost gap.
Yes, so basically it depends really what to do. Earlier this year we ran a survey and we asked project proponents what they thought would, what incentives they thought would support their project the most. And what we observed was that proponents would tend to choose options that were actually available in their jurisdiction. So proponents think that the mechanisms that are available in the jurisdiction can be enough to support a project, provided they can actually access them. And the thing we noted in the business case chapter is that the projects that are in construction now have accessed a very wide range of support mechanisms, and obviously the more that are available to them, the better. But what really matters is for these projects to have access to them, and that's what's needed at the very least for the first of a kind demonstration project. Some really targeted support mechanisms like capital grants and local tax credits and loan guarantees, even if they can be available. But that's only enough for the first generation of demonstration projects. If you really want to accelerate the deployment at commercial scale and have a large number of projects, then you need, rather than one-off mechanisms, you need structural support, and that's going back to what Evelyn said about having a high CO2 price and making sure that there is certainty about this CO2 price being consistent for a long period of time. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Gwen. So can, I think in this case, Ian, give us a short comment concerning the EU CCS directive and the idea of building the new power plant CCS ready. Ian?
On CCS ready specifically, well, there is a provision within the directive, which many of you will be familiar with. On the directive more broadly, we have now reached a much stronger position in the past 12 months with regards to implementation. There was an official transposition deadline of the 25th of June 2011, which many of you will be aware that a large number of the member states missed, and that was reported in last year's status report. What we have seen now, and this was reported by the European Commission earlier in this year, was that we have now reached a much stronger position in terms of implementation and transposition, with all but one member state now communicating to the Commission that they have actually implemented some aspects of the necessary legislation. Presently, the Commission is now undergoing a process of checking and conformity checking the transposition of the directive. So it's anticipated in the next few months, towards 6 to 12 months, we'll see a report from the Commission detailing any actions that maybe need to be taken against individual member states for failure to transpose the directive. So that'll be obviously contained within next year's status report.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
Thanks,
we've got two questions here that I'll ask Holger and Edlin to take on. One, there seems to be a loss of momentum in the climate change debate. Is there a realistic scenario where CCS ceases to be a needed technology? And as supplementary for both of them, would you say that in relation to CO2 storage monitoring and verification, the process and various technologies around that, is that key to bridging the obvious gap between the science and the law? So maybe on that first question of Edlin, I can hear you, CCS being a needed technology.
Well, the only scenario that I can imagine where CCS wouldn't be a needed technology is where the IPCC decides that what is needed for the world in 2050 isn't actually the case, and that global warming isn't an issue. And we know that from the latest report that they're 95 to I think 99% certain that CO2 is causing climate change. And then again, we've got industries such as iron and steel and cement that are absolutely core to the development of our economies, of our countries, to the way we live. And at the moment, we do not have any other options in many of these industries as alternatives to CCS. Potentially in power, you could, I don't know, down the track see some issues, but renewables can't account for all the power needs that we have going forward. So fossil fuels will be needed in the medium term. And CCS in this case is really the only option for using these fuels.
Olga, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's also a matter of cost. You can definitely consider scenarios where you apply much more and costly technologies than CCS, and would end up definitely with a portfolio of climate change mitigation technologies until the year maybe 2050 that is much more expensive than a scenario that is achievable. Cost also relates to achievability. Countries that have abundance of natural resources like water or excellent wind and solar opportunities can definitely go for those renewable energies and build a portfolio around that. But let's say developing countries which have a strong treasure of oil and gas and fossil fuels in total will definitely make use of those resources and will deploy them as OECD countries have done before them. And this really requires that CCS is being applied and is part of a climate change mitigation portfolio. You mentioned the second, yeah?
Yeah, the second one, would you say in relation to CO2 storage, monitoring and verification is actually key to bridging the obvious gap between the science and the law?
Well, absolutely. You need to be able to verify, you know, in a numbers game, which is what we're doing with our CO2 mitigation. We need to be able to verify that that CO2 is being stored safely and securely. So through being able to quantify how much CO2 we're storing, we'll actually be in a better position to be able to give confidence in CCS, to be able to say how much it's storing, and to show that the contribution that CO2 storage can make. Holger, did you have anything?
Yeah, maybe just one comment. We should always be aware that CO2 is not a poison. It is something that we breathe out with every breath that we take. It's part of the natural carbon cycle that really has helped life emerging on Earth. And CO2 has also been stored in the inner of the world for millions of years. It comes along with natural oil and gas. It's part of many subsurface reservoirs. It has been there for millions of years, and there's no reason to not assume that storage of CO2 can occur and can help mitigate climate change in future. The underground and re-injecting CO2 is just a better alternative than releasing and venting CO2 into the atmosphere.
So a supplementary for Edwin and Olga, bio-CCS is in the news every so often. It's an option to actually create negative emissions. What's your view on it, and will you consider it in the LCIPs? That comes from Pierre Lorenz Stella, bio-CCS.
Maybe just to kick off, bio-CCS has a negative CO2 balance. However, it's also a matter of where and when it can be applied. It needs the crops to fill the necessary volumes of combustion and then subsequent capturing of CO2. It needs the feedstocks really, and they are not always available, and there's definitely also sometimes the question of what has priority, the feedstock production and making available of room and space for producing the feedstock, or sometimes even just feeding populations and making sure that primary needs of human beings are also being served. The LCIPs that we see in our survey don't have massive application of bio-CCS as far as I know. There might be a couple of plants also undertaking trials to burn biomass and produce some negative CO2 balances, but that is, I think, from my perspective, more at the pilot test phase and early stages.
Okay, look, there's a question here on public confidence in CCS, which we've got a question saying in developed countries we've gone from NUMBY, not under my backyard, to banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. So how's the GCCSI advancing the need for public assurance about CCS? That's a very good question, and I like those little humorous touches there. It's a very important topic. As General Manager Corporate Affairs, that's part of my responsibility. It's something we take very, very seriously. So it's dealt with at several different layers. So you'll see a chapter in the report on our work around best practice in terms of public acceptance, and that's taking into account work from many different countries, and you'll see an increasing amount of resource available to projects when they're actually at the point of needing to engage the public. On the broader front, I think we'd all agree there's a great deal to do, and we're playing our part on that. We're not the only ones. But what we've done with the Global Status of CCS report itself each year, in particular in the last 2 years, is use it as an opportunity not only to report on the state of progress, but also get across the key steps that need to happen to make CCS move forward. So we've made a point of going out to the media on this, and I'm pleased to say this last time around, 2-3 weeks ago, we've got articles in everything from the New York Times, the Guardian, the Australian, a number of newspapers in Japan, media outlets in Korea, as well as a lot of online publications, getting the messages out, and in that respect, making sure that we can position CCS as part of the portfolio of solutions to meeting the challenges of climate change. And it was probably pretty timely that the IPCC report came out a little bit before that. There's always more to do, and we are also embarking on a new website project to explain CCS, probably not to those of you in the professional CCS community, but a website that goes back to basics, i.e. not our current website, which is aimed at professionals, and it explains where CCS fits in, how it works in simple terms, all reference to expert documents. That's in production at the moment, and it'll take a couple of months, and if those of you that are interested in that work want to get in touch with me, I'm certainly very aware that we also need to link to expert work going on, which is specific to the interest in different regions and different countries. So it's a big piece of work, but we're certainly onto it. I've got 2 questions here for Edlin. How many projects capture CO2 from refineries and use it for EOR projects at the moment? Can you answer that? And a second one, which is similar, which advances were made in CCS in the oil and gas industry during 2013? Edlin?
Thanks, Gareth. In regards to refineries,
do you want to take that one on notice? Deal with this?
Sorry,
Yeah.
We don't yet have
one.
Yeah, no, give me just one moment. I've just had a quick look at the numbers.
Sure.
And could you please repeat the second question?
Yeah.
It was not really...
The second question, yeah, so which advances were made in CCS for the oil and gas industry during the last year? If any, but I guess there must have been some.
It's such a developed industry, it's hard to see where advances are. I thought it was a really positive step that we saw with the Lula project in South America, in Brazil, where they're on an offshore platform, a floating platform, they're capturing CO2 from their gas stream and using it for enhanced oil recovery. And that's the first floating offshore and the deepest EOR well that is around.
Mm-hmm. And the majority of all new projects that we have seen becoming operational in the last year use enhanced oil field recovery. So it is really currently the driver of projects reaching the operational stage, using CO2 for producing more oil and gas. On the other hand, the incidental storage coming along with CO2 being used to produce more oil and gas is a very positive side effect of this industry that provides revenues to the operators, and on the other hand really enables projects and project proponents to develop the necessary monitoring, measuring, verification means that really makes this industry then a carbon capture and storage industry long term.
And if I could jump in there, Holger, we've got the Utamanya project in Saudi Arabia, and we've also got the Lost Cabin gas plant in Wyoming in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are new projects to have
come on stream.
Lost Cabin to have commenced operation and Utamanya to have commenced construction. Gareth, in regards to the question about oil refining, we don't currently have any projects in operation, but the difficulty is sometimes that with oil refining, the part that we're seeing CO2 capture occurring is in the hydrogen production, which is often used in part of the oil refining process. So the one project that we classify in oil refining is the Alberta trunk line with Northwest Sturgeon Refinery CO2 stream. But we do have a couple of other projects that are in hydrogen production that are related to the oil refining industry.
And a question for Holger, can you estimate the share of captured CO2 that can be utilised, used instead of stored? The share. It's because we've talked quite a lot about utilisation of CO2, so probably a very difficult judgment to make there.
Yeah, in our Global Status of CCS report 2013, we elaborate a bit on the relation between EOR storage and saline formation storage and the potential for both. What we have seen in the analysis around that is that even though EOR is currently being the driver and most important storage sector of CCS, saline formations will take over long term. The potential, storage potential in the world for saline formations is much larger than for oil and gas reservoirs that are depleted or nearing depletion. Ultimately, saline formations will be the dominant storage type. However, the next 10, 15 years, approximately oil and gas reservoirs will still be the dominant factor. Evelyn, I think, mentioned 7 million tons when the currently executing or being constructed projects will enter, which will use saline formations.
Yeah.
And the EOR...
out of the active projects, which are those projects that are either under construction, so in execute and operate, there would be 31 million tonnes for EOR, including both those, and then 7 once all these projects reach operation for deep saline formations.
And maybe to put that into perspective a bit, in, well, more advanced passenger cars usually use some or emit some 2 tons of CO2 per year, and then the currently operating projects with some 25 million tons per annum equate to some 10, 12 million tons, million passenger cars who emit approximately 2 tons of CO2 per year.
Okay, look, and one thing I'd just like to add to that, we've got an expert report on our website, which is called Accelerating the Uptake of CCS, Industrial Use of Captured Carbon Dioxide. That was published in March 2011. So that report, Industrial Use of Captured Carbon Dioxide, I'd point questioner to and others, because there's a lot of useful, if you just look at the executive summary, you'll find it's an excellent guide to that subject in a bit more detail. So then we've got another question here for Holger, and that is, do you see CCS development having the required time for demonstration prior to the commercialization phase? And if so, do you have an estimate of time and effort needed for the demonstration and development of CCS prior to its widespread commercial application? I guess that's one of those judgment questions. It's a hard one for you to answer, but I'll pass that to you, Holger.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, all technologies go from normally laboratory scale to pilot testing to demonstration, and then to, if they are lucky and successful, to commercial deployment. And the time between the laboratory test phase and the final commercial deployment really depends. You can see technologies that have advanced very quickly. Just to give an example, LNG development was or has started maybe in the 80s and has really advanced very quickly. We would hope the same for CCS. If you compare that with the necessary trajectories from, for example, the IEA for CCS, we need to hurry. We need to have almost all 65 projects currently being seen in our survey in operation by 2020, and definitely would like to see even a stronger uptake of CCS until 2025. So I would hope that CCS is really a commercial applicable technology, sound proven, demonstrated by 2025, and that no new fossil fuel-based plant comes operational without CCS after 2020, well, 2030 maybe.
Okay, and look, we're pretty much out of time, but I've got a kind of quite a rounded question here, which is probably for Holger, Edwin, and Ian to add to parts two. Are there still any significant outstanding uncertainties when it comes to CO2 storage, or are we at the point where it's become mainly about proving the CO2 behaves as we expect it, and that the regulators, as well as the general public, are satisfied? So that's a sort of really good question to round off with, and if I can ask Holger, Edwin, and Ian to add some insight to that, please.
I think we're pretty sure that the technology and the capability is there. Like, for instance, Sleipner in Norway has been injecting CO2 since 1996 in deep saline formations, and the oil and gas industry has been doing it with EOR for decades. What we probably would like to see is just more diversification. Each subsurface storage formation is different and will behave differently, and it will be good to increase our understanding of all the different formations. And while small-scale test injections are very important, it's not in the mass that will be required for CCS demonstration more generally. So we need to see more projects that are in larger quantities. And I think we have, the scientists have good confidence that we can do this, and the geologists believe it is possible, and we know we can do it because we've seen it before, but it's always good to just keep building further confidence.
Anything you want to add, Holger, to that?
Yeah, just one small comment before maybe Ian can help us further on the regulatory side. The project in Norway, Lynn just mentioned, they are really operational for a long, long time, have stored more than 20 million tons of CO2. They exist in a really demonstrated regulatory environment. They help the project proponents to avoid significant carbon taxes in Norway. They operate in a proven environment, and I think that is my comment here.
Ian, do you want to just finish up on that? Any comments?
Well, I think Edlin and Holger have done a very good job. I think the only point I would add is from a regulatory perspective. For many regulators, this really has been a case of learning by doing. This is, whilst we do have substantial experience that's been garnered over the past few years, and particularly with regards to some aspects found in regulating, for example, parts of the EOR process, for the storage aspects that we've been grappling with, some of the novelties and peculiarities around that, we found regulators really having to get to grips very quickly with methodologies and designing frameworks which can really accommodate some of those really quite difficult elements. And I think largely it's been very, very successful, and that's been demonstrated in some of the new legislation that we've seen in the past few years.
Maybe just one more comment. Yeah?
Yes.
Sorry, one more comment to what Ian just said. We also have seen the road projects in Europe really advancing their permits under the EU directive, and they, I think, really have contributed together with the regulators to the advancement of this directive. It is, as Ian just mentioned, learning by doing and cooperating together and overcoming the first barriers and hurdles in the regulation. But we have a very good report on the road permitting success on our website that I really also recommend to read.
Thank you, Holger, and look, thanks to our panel and thanks to Edlin on your behalf. I'm going to have to draw it to a close, but a couple of things to point out. We've pretty much ranged over the whole, all the aspects of CCS in your questions, so I thank you for those. I'd recommend to you all the material on our website, including the global status of CCS document itself. You'll see the web addresses in front of you. Within a couple of days, we'll be actually putting the recorded webinar for any colleagues who missed this and the presentation slides on the website. The material, obviously the main report is there already, as well as, and I would recommend to you the summary report, which is very easy to access, summation of all the issues and what needs to be done to advance CCS. In closing, I would also like to thank you for your participation. As I said at the beginning, this is one of a series of webinars that we do on topics across the CCS chain, and we'll be doing others, so please look out for that in our newsletter and on the website. We're always interested in your feedback, and that includes topics for the future, so please do let us have that either right. We're always interested in your feedback, and that includes topics for the future, so please do let us have that either on feedback on this webinar or actually on future topics. And with that, I thank you for joining us, and I'll close the webinar. Thank you very much.